Kevin Smith. Love him or hate him, you can't deny that the man has made his mark and impact on cinema during his 30-year career. Similar to other legends such as Tarantino, Anderson, the Coen brothers, and Scorsese. From dropping out of film school in the early 90s, to eventually building a loyal cult following over 30 years later by making so many classic and great movies, and Cop Out, that are still fondly remembered to this day in the wonderful world of niche cult cinema. But how exactly did Kevin build such a loyal fan base? What was the thing that brought him such recognition and would kickstart his entire career in film? Well, that thing was a little indie film released on October 19th, 1994 called Clerks. A film that I can say with 100% confidence changed independent cinema forever. Now, yes, you had indie films released prior such as Richard Linklater's Slacker and E. Elias Merhige's Begotten. But Clerks is simply the indie film that showed and proved to a new generation of filmmakers that making and telling your story on an extremely low budget can work. Because the production of Clerks is quite an interesting one that should be taught in film schools when talking about independent cinema. I mean, I would have taught my old film class in the 11th grade about the production of Clerks if we actually got to talk about indie cinema in that class. But I'd recommend checking out this video if you really want to know about the production of Clerks. But to put it short, Kevin Smith was a dropout of Vancouver Film School from New Jersey, who maxed out all of his credit cards and risked everything to make a little movie based on his real life at the time. The film that was made on a budget of $27,000 would initially see no success, with Smith believing that he was severely fucked for life, with piles of credit card debt built up during the making of the movie. That was until the film was ultimately bought out by film distributor Miramax, to which it would become a massive cult hit that would launch Kevin Smith's long-lasting career, filled with many ups and downs and ups and cop-outs to downs to finally where we are today. With Kevin running multiple podcasts and still making movies every now and then. And whatever the fuck Kilroy was here is. Now to start things off with a basic description on what to expect in the movie, Clerks is essentially just a very simple, basic, and very dialogue-heavy film when you first watch it. Because when you get down to it, Clerks is basically just about a guy who works at a convenience store who deals with annoying customers, loiterers, his coworker best friend, and other stuff that I'll eventually get into later in this so-called review. Now the plot itself follows the story of Dante Hicks, a young 20-something who works at the local Quick Stop Groceries convenience store. Now Mr. Dante himself is the type of character who many could find relatable in a way, as well as being a literally me type of character, simply because Mr. Dante is the kind of character who many in the retail business could relate to a lot, due to the kinds of stuff he deals with in his everyday life working at the Quick Stop, like the stuff I mentioned earlier. So Mr. Dante has woken up on his day off to work a shift that he reluctantly agrees to do, despite having a very important hockey game to play at too. Anyways, Mr. Dante gets up and begins his shift to the song Clerks by Love Among Freaks, a song that perfectly fits in with what's happening on screen as well as other people's real-life mornings. Now, licensed music is usually seen as a bad thing or a pet peeve in the eyes of a lot of cinephiles everywhere, since it either doesn't fit into the movie or feels completely forced onto by the studio. But a film like Clerks, or any film made by Edgar Wright and James Gunn for that matter, can show that licensed music can be a great addition to a film when it works and is done right. Think of Guardians of the Galaxy, for example. The licensed music being specifically 80s and 70s works, since Star-Lord was abducted from Earth in the 80s and the music from his Walkman is the only link left between him and Earth. The same thing could be said for Baby Driver, since Baby copes with his trauma by burying himself with his music. And because Edgar Wright wrote the film and its scenes with specific songs in mind. You know what, just go watch some Edgar Wright movies and anything made by James Gunn. It helps that while the soundtrack to Clerks is pretty specific to its time, it still holds up incredibly well to this day, since its various alternative rock, grunge, and punk rock songs adds to the overall vibe and even enjoyability of the film. I also think it's likely because I'm into that kind of music, so call me biased if you want. Anyways, the rest of the movie follows Mr. Dante's everyday life working at the Quick Stop, except we see Mr. Dante get into various scenarios, like getting pelted by cigarettes after being compared to a Nazi by a Chewlies gum representative for simply doing his job by selling cigarettes, having an argument with his girlfriend Veronica, getting charged for a crime he didn't commit, and much more. Now when talking about Clerks, we can't forget about its secondary protagonist, Randall. Randall is the clerk at the RST video store who always arrives late at work, has no care and respect for the customers, and is the best friend of Mr. Dante. Now despite having the traits of and being a pretty unlikable douchebag towards every character in the film, Randall is surprisingly one of the most memorable characters in the entire film, because Kevin was able to do something that a large majority of Canadian cartoons struggle to do. Write a character who's an asshole towards other characters and actually make them a very funny and memorable character. I bring this up because, as I mentioned earlier, Randall is basically just a douchebag and an asshole towards a large majority of the characters in the film, yet he's written to be an actual funny and very memorable character, similar to other characters such as the gang from Always Sunny, Eric Cartman, and Bender from Futurama. Characters who are either just jerks or horrible people, yet the writers actually knew how to make them likable and funny, since we normally wouldn't root or consider our favorite characters to be unlikable assholes, unless they were written to be likable, funny, and memorable. It also helps that Randall's performance by Jeff Anderson, a guy who had no acting experience prior and only auditioned because the film sounded interesting, is easily one of the best in the entire film, as well as being a fan favorite, since Jeff did such a perfect job delivering Randall's lines both perfectly and naturally. It's also interesting knowing that Randall was originally written for Kevin Smith to play, before he ultimately decided to play Silent Bob instead, simply because he realized that he could not memorize all of Randall's lines, wisecracks, and jokes throughout the film, due to there being a lot of long takes throughout the film. And honestly, I'm glad that Smith did not play Randall, because I and many others cannot imagine anyone else but Jeff playing Randall, since Jeff literally is Randall, because he nailed the character so much in his first acting role that it's literally impossible to replace him. Now speaking of performances, pretty much everyone in this film does a great job in their respective roles, like Brian O'Halloran as Mr. Dante, and it's largely because all of the characters sound and feel like real people, especially since many of these actors were beginners, theater actors, or simply had no acting experience at all. Primarily Jeff Anderson, as I mentioned earlier, and especially a young Jason Mewes, a guy who Kevin Smith based an entire character on, with that character of course being one of the standout characters, Jay, this stoner dude who hangs outside the quick stop all day with his best bud, Silly Bob.
That's Silent Bob.
While they basically do nothing but chill, deal drugs, and cause basic mischief, we actually see that the two are pretty important characters, because the two try and cheer up Mr. Dante after his miserable day by inviting him to go hang out with them. Hell, even Silent Bob gives Dante advice in his only speaking line throughout the entire film.
You know, there's a million fine-looking women in the world, dude, but they don't all bring you lasagna at work. Most of them just cheat on you.
This one line was only done because Jay Mewes was drunk and couldn't even remember his own line in this one shot, so Kevin had to step in for him. That would eventually pave way for Silent Bob's trait of only speaking when necessary in the other View Askew Universe films. Now these two stoner fucks were such a standout that Kevin has included them in every View Askew Universe film, from this, Mallrats, and all the way up to Clerks 3. Likely in part because Kevin Smith himself owns the rights to the iconic and memorable stoner duo, and because Kevin's fans still love them to this day. Now the rest of the film is essentially just the basic, everyday, and miserable life of Mr. Dante working at the quick stop, while dealing with and even talking about a wide array of annoying customers like the milkmaid, this old guy who I'll eventually get back to in a few minutes. Trust me, he's very important to the plot, the video store customers, as well as the other customers with stupid questions. But Clerks itself is filled to the brim with so many iconic moments, because it's more than just Mr. Dante and Randall talking and dealing with customers all day. Since we of course have the hockey scene on top of the roof, to which we get this iconic, legendary, and beautiful line delivery.
Hey, are there any balls down there?
About the biggest pair you ever seen, Diggleberry.
Actually, while we're at it, I might as well mention that Clerks is simply just a film that is filled to the brim with iconic, memorable, funny, and quotable moments that are enjoyed and quoted by so many people to this day with iconic lines such as,
I hate guys. I love women. Salsa shark.
All Jedi had was a bunch of Muppets.
37. My girlfriend sucked 37 dicks.
In a row?
What do you mean there's no ice? You mean I gotta drink this coffee hot?
I'm not even supposed to be here today.
And much more that I can honestly show all day, but can't because Miramax and Paramount will likely copyright claim this video and my ass. Anyways, you also have Dante and Randall going to someone named Julie Dwyer's funeral, a character you'll be hearing about in Kevin's other movies like Mallrats and Chasing Amy. The same thing could be said about Randall's weird cousin Walter, a character who gets referenced again in the prequel film Mallrats by its main character, Brody, which means that Brody and Randall are cousins. Hi, I'm Ultra and welcome to 107 Facts. Also, Kevin's got some real cinematic universe building that makes Marvel wish they could do better. Anyways, it's implied that Dante and Randall caused something bad to happen during the service, and it's something that wasn't shown simply because of budget reasons. So I'll just let Kevin Smith himself explain from this bonus feature that's included on the Clerks X DVD release.
So there's a scene in Clerks that I wrote and we never shot it. And we didn't shoot it because it would have been too expensive. And we were going to have to secure permission to shoot at a location that wasn't Quick Stop and RST, which we had the run of the house on.
Yeah.
And we would have had to get a casket and get extras, you know, to play mourners and whatnot. So we never shot it. It was a scene that, like, when I sent Mose the script, it was the first scene he flagged, where he's just like, I don't know if we could do this. I don't know if this logistically will work out. So we never shot. It didn't hurt.
But honestly, I think the funeral not being shown works anyways, because it simply allows the audience to use their imagination and picture what happened during the funeral. But thankfully, the scene would eventually get reanimated by Powerhouse Animation during their earlier years. Yes, the studio behind Netflix Castlevania, the animated cutscenes in Sonic Origins, the all-time classic Adventures of Kid Danger, and Masters of the Universe Revelations, created by none other than Kevin Smith. Anyways, if you still think that Clerks is still just a basic film that's nothing but people talking, then wait until you hear that the film actually has conflict in it, something that is 100% required for any film to be good, according to someone I went to film school with. To explain the lead up to the conflict and stuff I hadn't already talked about, Mr. Dante has a girlfriend named Veronica, but Dante is visited by his ex-girlfriend Caitlin Bree after she ended her engagement with another guy, and wishes to date Mr. Dante again and hopefully rekindle the relationship. But ultimately, she unknowingly had sex with an old dead guy while in the bathroom, who apparently had a heart attack while in said bathroom after he asked for a porno mag earlier in the film. See, I told you weird stuff happens during Mr. Dante's shift. Anyways, Caitlin and the dead old guy are carried away in an ambulance, and this is ultimately where our conflict shows up, because Veronica finds out about the situation and furiously dumps Mr. Dante, before revealing that Randall told her that Mr. Dante had already confessed the previous events to her. Now upset and furious, Mr. Dante brawls and attempts to beat the shit out of Randall while trashing the Quick Stop during said brawl. That's the conflict in the film. Because once again, having a conflict in your film is like the most important thing to have in a film, according to an old classmate I used to know from film school. But honestly, the conflict in the film works because it just works. And that's all that needs to be said. Anyways, Mr. Dante rants at Randall and blames him for the day's events before repeating his iconic catchphrase,
I'm not even supposed to be here today!
Randall eventually blows up at Mr. Dante by reminding him of all the stuff he did that day, such as abandoning his post several times that day to slack off on his own accord, choosing to go to work on his day off and basically telling him that he could have left at any point in the day, but didn't. And finally reminding him that neither both of them are as advanced as they think they are. Otherwise, they wouldn't be stuck with such lowly jobs at a fucking video and convenience store. Finally, the two eventually reconcile after their conflict and clean up the store, with Dante planning to take the next day off to visit Caitlin in the hospital and attempt to reconcile with Veronica. Before departing, Randall tosses Dante's shoe polish sign in his face and declares,
You're closed.
with the film ending and going into credits mode. Oh yeah, did you know that the original ending had Mr. Dante getting shot and killed after being robbed on his day off? This kind of brings irony and pays off to the phrase, I'm not even supposed to be here today, since he's killed on his day off. This also explains why the film kinda ends so abruptly in the final cut. So in conclusion, I still believe and think that Clerks is a film that 100% has its place in cinema as a whole. I mean, it was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry for a reason, since it was a landmark film that proved that it's possible to make a full 90-minute movie on what essentially felt like pennies to the eyes of Hollywood big shots, because anyone can create and tell their own stories and film it for dirt cheap. Hell, it's become even more accessible nowadays with the advent of the internet and more film schools popping up, with many young aspiring filmmakers like myself and my former film school classmates and friends to create and film their works of indie cinema on extremely shoestring budgets. Now, Clerks' success and popularity would of course pave the way for a new wave of extremely low-budget indie films like The Blair Witch Project and much more to be made, as well as obviously inspiring many up-and-coming filmmakers as I mentioned earlier. Clerks itself is also a film that is genuinely the perfect directorial debut, similar to Linklater's Slacker, since it shows how a filmmaker can get their start very small to eventually getting to make bigger and sometimes better movies. In the end, you should just watch Clerks right now, due to how amazing it is, even if you're not into cult cinema like me, and maybe because you should try and grow your taste in film if you aren't a person like me, because it allows you to discover and watch something new for a change. This is Ultra, and I'm not even supposed to be here today. Oh yeah, in case you're wondering why the film is in black and white, it was due to budget reasons simply because the production of Clerks was so small and so low budget that they could not afford to film it in color due to how expensive it would have been.